Well, hello to our new listeners. Thanks for joining. And to our returning guests, welcome back. Welcome to season 6 of the Sibyl podcast. My name is Mo. In this season, like you've been used to, get ready for more amazing stories, more inspirational stories to help you set your stories free. I created this podcast as a resource for Blacks, Asians, and those who love them to share stories and processes, as well as to build communities around important salient issues that affect all of us as humans. So on this show, you get to hear amazing stories from people like you who show us how to get more out of life. The stories featured here are by people whose journey I am partly inspired by, as well as challenged by, but most importantly, people whose courage and vulnerability have afforded us an opportunity to hear their life stories. And I hope you find them as inspiring. Now enjoy the show, and don't forget to share this episode and the other ones. Okay. Welcome back, everyone, to the podcast. This is Mo, and today I'm super excited to actually bring today's guest to you. He's a powerhouse. This guy is loaded. Talk about grits and glory. Well, so who is he? He's a Nigerian-born immigrant who moved to the US just 6 years ago. And actually, in that short amount of time, he's not only completed an MBA, he has started 2 companies, guys, not even 1 and 2, 2 companies, and traveled to multiple states. His story is one of grit and an immigrant's determination to live the American dream, right? While his dreams may not be actualized yet, according to him, he's open to sharing lessons learned along his journey. Now, his passions are documentaries and podcasts, and if you were to just go to his podcast, which he has one, it's so detailed, you can tell that he's vested into culture and just that philosophy that there's so much you can learn from each other, that life is just a whole classroom. And we can learn from each other's stories. So he brings a lot of diverse guests to his podcast. His podcast is called Culture Class, where he interviews people from all walks of life. I've seen it all. A gay clergy, an amputee, a homeless person, I've seen it all. Just do type the name of his podcast and type a topic. There's always an episode out for you. Everyone, without further ado, please join me in welcoming Nosa Iyare to the podcast.
Hi, Mo. It's a pleasure to be here. You talk about powerhouse. You're a powerhouse.
Oh, please.
I could be telling you, you guys are the in class. You guys are the one who sit in front, the serious
because
people.
We're very slow. That's why we're slow, and we have we have eye issues. So you know how learning by diffusion, like passive diffusion, you have to be very close to the source.
Yeah, I don't even know what passive diffusion is. You see, that's what I'm saying. What is diffusion and osmosis? What the hell?
How come you know osmosis but you don't know diffusion? You know what I did today, though? I was listening to the episode you did with LD. Man, That was a wholesome one. I was gonna let you know, like, even though I didn't grow up in his era, but almost like I grew up, because some stories were kind of similar, apart from the whole bloody riot thingy, but just the nostalgia of the past, the innocence, thinking you're all one, playing with your neighbor, and just, Niger childhood. I wanted to say that to you, and your questions were really, really good, especially getting to know who he is, like, because you don't really get to see that story in the limelight.
Yeah, I mean, I'm so appreciative to LD. Like, I really didn't know him like that.
Really?
I just reached out to him and he was so gracious. Like, my platform isn't even as half as big as the platforms he's been on. And he came on and he was very open and he told his story. And it's very unfortunate to see that some of those things he talked about that happened in the 80s are still going on in Nigeria today, more than 30 years
later. And that episode was 3 years ago, if I recall.
Yeah, that episode was 2020 or in 2023. So yeah, it was during the pandemic. I
remember you talked about.
That's probably why he had my time, because it was at home.
But still, I could have sworn you guys were like, maybe you knew someone who, at the very least, you knew someone who knew him, because man, 2 hours of just pure conversation—that's pure gold right there. Kudos to you.
I mean, we've gotten to know each other now a little bit, but he's still busy. But back then we didn't know each other at all.
But still, kudos to you. So, for those who might be wondering
who
Podbreak is, I mean, he's just one of the founding fathers of Afro music, and he's so humble about it. Anyways, let's start with you. This is your time now. So, Nosa, I'm actually getting a bit intimidated here. In just 5 years, all of this. Imagine if they just give you 5 more years. Okay, let's just start from the basic, questions. Everyone knows this is coming. Just tell us a little bit about your background, your family life, how you grew up, and all that kind of fancy stuff.
Yeah, growing up was, and let me see how I can say this story a little differently than I've done on other podcasts. Growing up was very interesting, I guess, to start with my parents from what they've told me and stories I've heard and everything. So my dad actually used to work for my grandfather on my mom's side. So my dad used to work for my mother's father, right? They were in the military, in the Air Force, the Nigerian Air Force. And obviously my mother's father was a more senior ranking officer than my dad. But just due to the fact of working with her father, he got close to her, and he was a helicopter pilot back in the military days. And one time he actually kind of like, I wouldn't say, I forget the military term, like go AWOL, but he actually used military equipment, like used a military helicopter to go pick up my mom, which was like a big no-no.
Wow.
But yeah, that was like back in the 70s and stuff, but anyway, that's just a bit of context to know a bit of the whirlwind of how, probably my brother and I were conceived and all that good stuff. But anyways, so they got married, had my brother and I, just by virtue of the fact that my dad was in the military, I ended up living in all sorts of places all around Nigeria. So I was very, very well traveled. I always say, like, there are 36 states in Nigeria. And we probably lived in like 20 of those. And, there were times where I lived in boarding school. So there were times where I'll go to school from living in one state. And by the time I'm coming back for holidays, I'm coming back to a different state, a different house type of thing. So, but it was pretty interesting moving around. I didn't really like it growing up as a kid. But right now I have so many friends, like Facebook. I have friends from all over Nigeria, all over the world. And that's probably, the birth of my affinity to other cultures, because I kept experiencing things in a different way as we moved around. But yeah, that's how it was in a nutshell. Kind of like military brat. Dad kind of like raised us to be, free-minded. He never really was that controlling African parent. Sometimes I really like see my dad today, like you really ask yourself, did you really grow up in the village, like with no electricity and no light? Because he's so cultured, he just thinks differently. Like you would never think he's this village boy that just comes, but everything he knows today he learned from reading books.
Wow.
Like he grew up dirt poor, and he'll go and help gather newspapers for the woman who's selling like akara and meat and all that, and she'll give him a little bit of her stuff, and that's how he'll eat for the day. And he didn't have money to pay school fees and everything. So you talk about my drive today, like all I'm trying to do is trying to impress him, to be honest, because I'm like, coming from his circumstances, what he achieved, I'm like, man, I have no excuses whatsoever. So that's kind of like a little bit about my background.
Oh, wow. Well, thanks for that. I mean, I can imagine how your childhood sounds like the childhood of dreams of many people's childhoods, but in actualization, in actuality, just the stress of having to not have like ties, and childhood already is a fleeting moment of the time. And for you, it was further accelerated by just moving around. Of all those places you moved to in Nigeria, which one would you say provided like for the most memorable childhood picture? Like if you could always go back to that one time in your childhood where it was like the most picturesque time and you had like the best time of your life, where would that be and why?
Yeah, my childhood wasn't all rosy. I mean, there are parts of my childhood I haven't shared publicly, but as far as like the good memories, a couple places. I mean, I remember growing up a little bit in Abeokuta, which is kind of like southwestern Nigeria. Yeah, that was pretty interesting. You know, I really got introduced to the Yoruba culture there, and you know, I had an uncle who had, you know, gone for NYSC, I think, in Abeokuta as well, and had stayed back. So, and he was a little older and everything. And, you know, he was probably saying a lot of stuff that kids should not be hearing. But that was a very interesting time growing up in Abeokuta. It was just fun memories. That was the first time I felt like I became unsheltered. Like I wasn't just at home, like we were free to go around the neighborhood and do whatever. And, you know, we're probably about like 6 or 7, my brother and I back then. And then later in life, when we were about 15 or 16, we lived in Abuja for a bit as well. And it was just my brother and I and my dad, you know, almost like, you know, 2.5 men type of situation, bachelor pad with the dad and the bros type thing. So that was pretty interesting as well, because we were learning to drive then. So we would like kind of like steal the car, but we didn't know how to park the car in reverse. So we'll like kind of like park it straight, and my dad didn't know we had taken it. But that was a pretty interesting time. So I'll say Abeokuta and Abuja, those two places really had good memories for me. So
okay, I mean, those are definitely diverse environments. Vastly different environments. But thanks for putting more context to that. So it was just you and your brother, correct? Is that the only sibling you have?
No, so I have 3. I have a very interesting family tree, but I have 2 brothers and I have 4 sisters. But my brother and I were born just like a year and a half apart, and the other siblings came much later. So most times when I talk about childhood, it was basically me and him, because, you know, my other siblings were probably like a decade older than, so we're not in the same peer group at all, so we're a little older.
Wow, that's a lot of siblings. So let's talk about just moving to the US. Why the US? And usually for just to apply some form of brushstrokes, when we talk about immigration, especially from countries like ours, they usually, let me just say typically, you have what we call push and pull factors. Something pushing you away from your country, which is usually the lower resource country, and then pulling you towards the, you know, resource-rich country. So for you, would you say that was just like the situation in your case, or it was totally different?
Yeah, I think I can relate to that. There was definitely a push because living in Nigeria, there was definitely a push. I don't even know if I have to explain that, but obviously you wanted kind of like better for yourself and your future. As far as the pull factor, I just felt like there are a lot of things I could achieve in the US, which is kind of like, you know, when you mentioned, though, I've been here 5 years or whatever, or going on 6 years now, and it seems like I'm kind of like grinding out here because that's what I came here to do, right? Like we say in Nigeria, we didn't come here to count bridges, right? So it's like,
yeah.
Man, I mean, I was working in the bank at the time back in Nigeria, and I think there was a supervisor of mine who had probably been working for like 12 years in the bank at the time. And I was kind of like in my second or third year. And I was looking at him and I was like, is that who I want to be like after 12 years? You know, if I were to remain in the banking industry, you know, Nigeria is a very interesting system. Where, you know, it's more like who you know. And even when you know people, it's kind of like sometimes the system is against you. There's no perfect system in the world, but I felt like, okay, at least in a place like the US where there's a little more meritocracy, a little more, maybe I stand a fighting chance.
More, yeah.
And if I come here, knowing that I know my ability, like I have the natural ability, like I think I'm fairly intelligent, I'm disciplined, I'm hardworking. Like if I put in, you know, 100%, maybe I can see 50, even if I don't see 100% output. But in Nigeria, you can never tell. So that was kind of like the pull factor for me. I felt like it was a better kind of like climate that I can, you know, maybe deliver and I'll be rewarded for my efforts, at least to a certain extent. And that's kind of like why I made the decision. My brother had also come here because no one was actually thinking about coming to the US. But, an uncle of mine, he's late now, Uncle Monday, he sat my brother down, and, he was a very, very brilliant engineer, but, he graduated like in the 70s or something. And, like we say back home, Nigeria happened to him. Right. So he sat my brother down and, said, like he was like the top of his class, this and this, but look at where he ended up. And he doesn't want that for my brother and for us, that, he really advises my brother to seek opportunity outside the country. And we're even thinking about it back then, because we're running like a magazine back in Nigeria called Play Mode magazine back at the time. And we're thinking,
called what?
Play Mode. Yeah, it started in the University of Benin. And we're thinking of growing it to, to add award shows and kind of like Hip TV, kind of like do that whole thing.
Yeah.
But it was like, look, and my brother was kind of like adamant, no, we've started this thing, we're going to push this thing in Nigeria. But, like a year later, my brother kind of like took him up on his offer and tried his best. After about two years after that conversation, he went. And through him, my brother, like every other person, like me, my cousin, my friends, everyone just started like, leaving and stuff like that. So that's kind of like how it happened for me. That was a push and pull factor for me.
I mean, it's just typical of every most immigrant stories. So now tell me, what you came here for your MBA?
Correct.
What school did you go to?
I went to a little school in Northwest DC called American University.
Is it
American.
Private? Is it private?
It is a private school, yeah. Yeah, American University. And till fun fact, till tomorrow, my mother keeps asking me, what school did you say you went to again? I like American University. She's like, I know it's in America. What school in America? I know the name of the school is the American University.
American University.
But yeah.
Okay. So even as you were making your way down here, did you ever think you're going to stay back? Were you planning to go back home, or what was your plan?
I mean, I always plan to go back home eventually, even now. Like, I plan to go back to
last in the future.
The continent, eventually. But, I just set out my mind that, okay, this is kind of like a decade-long grind. It's been 6 years now, so I guess 4 years from now, in like kind of like 2027, I'll start to appraise myself on how I performed. But I just set myself that this is a 10-year thing, and I have to go out there and try to make something happen in 10 years. But eventually, obviously, I would love to go back and, give back and things like that. So,
okay. That's good. Now, what would you say were some of the biggest challenges you had while you were, adjusting to the U.S. system? It could be educational system or otherwise.
I mean, there was a little bit of culture shock, not a lot, because I always say this, like, I don't know how, like, our parents or grandparents' generation did it, who came to the U.S., like, maybe in the 70s or in the 60s, because there was no Google Maps, there was no Airbnb, there was no, like, it was easier for me because, at least even I came to the U.S., even when I didn't have, like, a SIM card or whatever, I could use WhatsApp with the airport Wi-Fi. I could at least order Uber to my brother's house. I could at least, stay in an Airbnb before I figured out where to have my apartment. I could do a lot of stuff because of technology. I booked a Greyhound bus even from Nigeria, even before I got here. So, and things were made a little, I could use my Nigerian debit cards back in the day before CBN and all that, in the interim before I got a bank account, all that stuff. So the culture shock for me was more so relating with Americans in college. So the first few months I was very, very loud. I remember one time I had gotten a job on campus and I was, the first few months in a new country, you're calling a lot of people back home. So I was calling someone back home and just how we talk as Nigerians, right? We're just very loud and someone just came politely and just closed the door of the office. Like he was trying to tell me like, my voice is ringing throughout the whole building, so it just got kind of like closed the door. I was like, oh wow, I didn't realize.
I'm not shouting. I'm Nigerian.
Exactly. I didn't realize I was that loud. So over time, I had to kind of like, I probably not consciously, but I probably adjusted just by sheer fact of interacting with Nigerians who back home who've told me that, I talk different for some reason. But there's that. And then, Nigerians can also be very, very direct, and that doesn't really, that's not an easy pill to swallow for a lot of Americans. A lot of Americans can be very politically correct, passive aggressive, that type of thing. So, I also had to learn to be, okay, maybe not be so direct type of thing. So those were kind of like two aspects I can say.
Okay. Thanks for sharing that. I really appreciate that. So even along that line of your immigration journey, we know that living abroad can be a plus for most people, right? But sometimes it can come with those mixed bags of emotions. Even though it exposes you to a new environment, a new culture, experiences, but there's some grief that comes with just living abroad. And for some, it might be longing for the familiarity and comfort of home. What would you say what are some things you mourn or miss the most about being away from home? Or being as a Nigerian or just someone who didn't grow up here but is, living abroad?
Right. This is an interesting question. To be honest, and I don't mean this in a bad way to say, I don't miss.
So you mean in a bad way?
I don't mean this in a bad way. Not to say I don't miss my country or, there's nothing I don't miss. But to be honest, I think there's been more positives for me living abroad than, there's definitely been challenges and, there are times that I miss home, but I think the positives living here outweigh anything back home just by sheer fact of me growing up, right? Number one, that whole family thing is a little bit of a foreign concept to me, just a little bit, because, my parents got divorced when I was pretty young. My dad was in the military, so that whole lovey-dovey family thing, I don't know if I if I can relate to that a lot. And not to say there wasn't love in the family and we didn't do stuff, but again, I don't know, maybe it's my personality as well. I'm okay being alone. I don't suffer from loneliness as a lot of people do. I'm very, very okay being by myself for days on end without any issues. So, but obviously, the food is one thing, you definitely get to miss because it's oh man, just being in Nigeria. And then also I might sound contradictory here, but I also kind of feel like I'm missing out on some opportunities as well. As I'm gaining opportunities here, I feel like I'm also missing out on some opportunities back home as far as the business and career. Because when I was about to leave, it was just when this whole Nigerian tech thing started pushing up, we're a group of 6 or 7 or 8, maybe 9 guys living a 2-bedroom apartment back in the day. We're all just young 22-year-olds struggling in Lagos, right? And one of us worked in Jumia, and he would come back every day from work with these amazing stories about how the tech sector is growing. And I witnessed a lot of tech startups getting born. I remember when Paystack was just getting off the ground, Flutterwave was just getting off. I worked in Access Bank, so the CEO of Flutterwave also was the head of IT or something at Access Bank. So I remember when they were testing out some of the Flutterwave technology within the bank, and then they broke off to start their own company, right? So I also feel like I'm missing out. Man, I'm sure if I was back home, I would have been at least the chief sales officer or something at one of these companies, right? But again, hey, you can't have it both ways, right? But again, there's always opportunity to go back and contribute in some form or fashion. So.
Okay. And even looking back, I think your childhood of just your frequent gyrations as a military kid has probably prepared you from this life of being away, because if anything, I can see that as a launching pad to the life you have right now. And I'm sorry to have heard about, I could sense a tinge of sadness when you talked about your parents' divorce, and so sorry to hear about that. I imagine it's shaped you as well into, who you are today.
Yeah. I mean, this is Mo doing her job as a podcaster, right? Trying to peel back and get the story out of me.
He's like, can you podcast a podcaster?
We know these tricks. But yeah, to answer your question, I mean, I mean, it's not so much as the divorce happening, it's just a bunch of stuff that happened after divorce, right? It was a lot. And, me being in the military, like you said, me growing up in a military household, going to boarding school, all that stuff, obviously coming abroad, like it was just like easy peasy for me. But yeah, the divorce was pretty challenging for a young guy, for young guys, I would say, my brother and I, trying to figure out why we're always in the middle of squabbles and arguments and things left and right, and being confused because you're living here one time, you're living there. In fact, let me just even say this story. So we lived in a barracks, right, by virtue of the fact that my dad was in the military. And then I know there was a time they sent us away from school, right? You know this thing they do in Nigeria, like that if you don't pay your school fees, they send you away from school, right? And the dude who was sending us away from school, who was also an officer, because, it's in the barracks, so you have teachers who are military people. And he knew my father, and I was like, there's no way in hell, like, your school fees aren't paid. Like, your dad is, like, up there. But because there were squabbles, again, court cases and stuff, and there were some things back and forth. Like, maybe for some reason, I don't know why our school fees weren't paid early. It's like, not like the money wasn't there. It's just, built based on the mechanics of the divorce.
That kind of quite,
and all that. Like, who pays what, who's responsible for what, and then we're sent home from school. So that was a pretty embarrassing day for me. But, again, it's all good. Like, some of those things, there are some positives that came out of it, but definitely some scars and trauma as well. So, you take the good with the bad.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. Now let's move away from immigration. We've spent a lot of time there, but I just wanted to give the audience a chance to kind of know a little bit about you, because I know you've done a lot of great stuff. So just to put some fluff to it. Now, American dream. My goodness, not even like. So I have a business, right? But I know starting a company is not an easy thing, especially keeping it going, right? And you've not only founded one, but two. So tell us how your dalliance with entrepreneurship and how you've been able to make your business successful. So I know you are one of the managing partners of Overwrite Inc. Congrats on that. And what you guys do is really to provide some form of assistance by aiding community development through access to financial services, right? So you use your expert knowledge in finance, management, and strategy. You can assist CDFIs, which has the community development financial institutions who serve low income and underserved communities, right? So, and those are like strategic companies right there, because you're right at the very heart of the communities that you're serving. So let's just start with your entrepreneurial dream and what Overwrite Inc., which is one of the places where you're a managing partner. And all of this in just 5 years. So see why I say you're a powerhouse. Some people are still here in America. I know that we're trying to compare, but you've done a lot for yourself, and I think you should give yourself a pat on the back. So yeah, let's talk about you now.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Like, I read somewhere that some of the best companies were started on accident, and hopefully that'll be my story as well. Like, my companies are still very young, but I guess time will tell, right? Like, I never really set out to be an entrepreneur, but I always did entrepreneurial things, right? So
I like
my challenge was always when it got to that point of collecting money for some type of value, right? Like, I could offer value all day, so I could, set up a non-profit association. We could run a student magazine. We could do this club. We can do that project. We can do whatever. So far, it didn't involve collecting money. But once I start to sell a service and I asked for money, like, I don't know, there was just something about me that felt like, oh man, I shouldn't be collecting money. Even though I'm offering a lot of value, I shouldn't be collecting money. But somehow all that stuff prepared me for where I am today. As far as my entrepreneurial journey, I think I'll attribute it to just guts, some type of guts that I developed. I don't know where it came from, because I was a pretty reserved and shy kid, and I still am in a lot of sense. But Yeah, I've never really been afraid to do anything. It's like, man, like what's the worst that can happen? Like, am I gonna die? If the answer is no, like, oh, I'm still gonna be alive after this experience, so why not try it? Like, and when I say guts, like I've never been afraid to, be made fun of, to make mistakes publicly, to be made a fool of publicly. I dust it off and I learn and we move on, right? So I think that has really been a very interesting trait, because as an entrepreneur, I think that's what a lot of people are afraid of. It's like, oh, what other people say, what if this doesn't work, things like that. So, my entrepreneurship journey was totally by accident. I went to school in DC. I was trying to stay in DC. I was looking for jobs in impact investing at the time, because I'd come from commercial banking, and I thought of commercial banking as the dark side of things. Like, how can I do good? So I was thinking, okay, impact investing is kind of like finance. I have an MBA, but it's impact investing, not just regular investing. I discovered the CDFI world. I got a job offer in Colorado. Again, guts. I had never been to Colorado. Like, why not? Like, what's the worst that can happen? Let's go. So moved to Colorado. Didn't know one person. Found an apartment, did everything, paid for my apartment, signed the lease online without even inspecting or seeing it. I'm like, let's go. So got here. I'm like, okay, got here. And then the next day I was in the office. I was like, okay, let's go. I didn't even have a bed. I went to get a bed after my first day in the office. But that's just the type of person I am. So I did that for a little bit. The pandemic happened. I left that job. I started a different business in the trucking industry. And then my old employer came knocking at my door about 2 years later and say, hey, do you want to come back and everything? And I was like, hey, I'm running this other business, it's not going to work for me right now. And they were like, okay, why not come back as a contractor, right? So that's what they said, and I was like, okay. And my other business wasn't going too well at the time, right? So I was like, okay, might make a few bucks. Let me come back as a contractor. And 3 months of being a contractor, in my third month, I made more than double the salary I had made when I was an employee. And this was when I was an employee, obviously you had to be there 9 to 5, you had to attend meetings, you had to do all this thing. You don't need to do all those things as a contractor. You just deliver your work and that's it, right? So it was less hours and double the money. I was like, man, maybe there's a business here. My Nigerian sense kicked in. And then I was like, okay, I know a lot of other people in the industry. Let me see who else kind of like needs this. So I reached out to a few people indicated interest. I was like, okay, no, we got to register a company. We have to make this formal. And then, set up this consulting company, which, we've been like on a year or so, almost a year journey officially right now. And it's been pretty interesting, again, working with community development financial institutions. I feel like, I'm not just working or doing business. I am, creating some good, because those organizations are catering to people who can't go to traditional banks to get funded, things like that. They're known by different names around the world, but I guess the rest of the world is kind of like close to microfinance, things like that. So having those type of organizations as clients, working for them, by extension, I feel like I am also creating a net positive for the world. So it's been definitely fulfilling so far, challenging, but fulfilling all the same.
That's good. Thanks for that. How about the second company? Are you able to tell us what your second company is about?
Oh yeah, the first company. So my first company was Truck Desk. I did that. That was my first foray into entrepreneurship. And man, if I had known, because there were probably like 8 or 9 opportunities for me to do something entrepreneurial in my life. I kept saying no. Friends would come to me, Nosa, I know you'll be good in this. Come and join me. Take 40%, take 30%. I'm like, no, I'm not ready, right? I should have started a company earlier, because a lot of mistakes I made with that first company. But it was very interesting. I did that for 2 years, Truck Desk. It was more so in the compliance space for truckers and things like that in the trucking industry. And then right now I'm focusing on Overwrite, which is my current company. And, the Truck Desk idea is still there, but I'm just spending a lot of my time now more so on Overwrite. And the Truck Desk is pretty much a tax filing every year for now. And then we can revisit that idea in the coming years. So,
okay. Just for those who might be, I think you kind of ease me into the next question. For those who might just be sitting on the edge about trying to just get it started, knowing what you know now, especially considering there was one time when Nosa would turn down opportunities. I think you said about 8 or 9 of them. To what you know now, what would you say? Because I say like there could be some actual barriers, but there could be some perceived barriers. Sometimes we let the perceived barriers like hold us back because we just view this mountain around the issue. But by the time you get there, you're like, oh my gosh, it wasn't even as difficult, as I thought it was going to be. What would you say were some actual barriers that, by actual barriers, but then a passive barrier? And how would you, if you would put some relative weights around them, which one would you put more weight to, and how did you go about overcoming them?
First things first, let me say that entrepreneurship is not for everybody. However, I think everyone should spend at least 1 year, and this is something I'm going to do for all my kids. So at least 1 year doing something entrepreneurial, right? Doesn't necessarily mean you should have a business, but even if you're driving Uber, you're having a podcast, you're doing a YouTube channel, you're, doing some nonprofit, you should do something that you take ownership of, and you're doing something entrepreneurial, even though it's not like a business, right? Because it just helps build character and it helps you stay focused and maintain discipline, all that good stuff. As far as actual versus perceived barriers, man, that varies person to person. Like, I can only speak from my experience.
Your case, yeah. Definitely.
Perceived barrier is, for me, it was a little bit cultural as well, because there are some things that just seem unattainable. Okay, I've just been in the US for 3 years. Who am I to start a company? Like, I remember when I was working in the organization that I said later became my clients, right, that called me back. Like, there was a conference we're trying to go to, right? And I think because it was a conference out of state, they had to fly people somewhere. And I think I was trying to ask my boss, kind of like, I was trying to lobby to go for that conference, right? But she was like, you know what, like, you've just been here a couple of months. Like, there are other people who've been in the company, unfortunately, like, we just have the budget for 3 people for flights and hotels. Like, these 2 or 3 people are going to go, but we'll think about you next year. And I remember when I started my company, I met my boss at that same conference like a year later. I'm like, we're here now, type thing. So, right. So, perceived barriers is just kind of like, man, there's some things that you think you need permission to do, and you really don't need permission. Like, when I was giving myself a title, like, my first title in the first few weeks I started the company was CEO. And I was like, man, this CEO, like, it's a consulting company. I don't really feel like CEO captured. Let me change it to managing partner. And I didn't say permission from anybody. I was like, just change it to managing partner, and that's what it is from now on. That imposter syndrome is a perceived barrier. Like, you feel like, oh, I'm not supposed to do this. Oh, I just can. I'm Arnold Schwarzenegger, right? I came from Poland or whatever. Oh, I don't speak the language. How am I going to be in Hollywood and be the biggest actor? It's a perceived barrier, but you can actually do it. Like, no one is holding you, no one is stopping you, right? I was watching a YouTube channel of a guy who went into real estate, right? And he was like, when he got into real estate, like, the real estate firm he was talking about, his boss was telling him, oh, no, you have to first be an agent, rent an apartment, and then graduate to here, and then graduate to there. And he just told himself, why? Now, look, he lived in California at the time. So what's the most expensive district in California? They're like Beverly Hills or whatever. I'll just start selling houses in Beverly Hills, even though he didn't have any experience. And he went to Beverly Hills, and he made a lot of mistakes, and it took a while. But, like, he made the decision to skip steps because he refused that whole imposter syndrome that, oh, you have to start from here, there has to be a progression or whatever. So that imposter syndrome is one perceived barrier. As far as the actual barrier, there's a lot. I mean, the sheer fact of running a business is just interacting with people, right? Just to an extent, being somewhat of a people person, because you're interacting with employees, and interacting with contractors, interacting with clients. Now, multiply that, in my experience, running a consulting business, which by sheer virtue that you're interacting with people all day, right? So just different characters, trying to put on a face. I was someone who like really didn't care about image back in the day. I'm like, hey, take me as I am. For a consulting business, that might not work a lot, because like your personality is almost like your image. You have to be, as much as possible, try to be professional, because you're selling yourself as much as you're selling your business and the services, right? So adjusting that way, particularly when you didn't grow up in this culture and you're trying to fit in is also like an actual barrier. And that some of the other stuff, just learning bookkeeping, learning standard operating procedures, learning how to scope out a project pricing, those little things that they don't teach you about business in school, those are some of the actual barriers. But they are overcome. They can be overcome. So yeah.
Overcome, right? Thank you, and I appreciate you just talking about, because I wanted to ask you from your personal experience, but even breaking them into the perceived ones and also the actual ones and how you went about, and even the importance of imposter syndrome. I don't know, for whenever I think about imposter syndrome, I don't know, there's a back of my mind that things is just relegated to females only. So thanks for that reminder that it can happen to anyone, but these are things that are not insurmountable. Now, it's one thing to start a business, it's another thing to have people just buying into that dream with you. And it seems your company, Overwrite Inc., you do have other people you're working with. As a matter of fact, anyone following your Instagram, I think you guys had a post about 12 weeks ago about your partners, and collectively you have decades of experience, your expertise is diverse, and you have a proven track record of success. How did you go about assembling the team, and what are some tips to those who might be thinking of partnering with other people? Because these are people who don't look like you, so I'm sure they're not related to you by any blood, but you found a way to make you work. What are some of your guiding principles and all that kind of stuff?
Man, the advice I'll have for anyone listening to this is, no matter where you are now, like, it's not like I'm up there. Even with this thing I'm doing now, just be diligent in what you're doing. Like, no matter how small it is, like, just if you get to spend 2 hours with someone and you guys are volunteering and, collecting tickets for a nonprofit, in that 2 hours, be diligent in that ticket collection, because that's the impression that person will have of you, right, going into the future. Like, there's always someone watching, right? There's always someone watching. Like, I didn't even know I had this much clout, like, before I started the business, because it was kind of like my name that carried me for a lot of those relationships, because people just say, oh, it's Nosa involved, I'm in, type of thing. Because people I've worked with in the past, either as colleagues, we've worked at other nonprofits together, we've worked in our high school alumni association together, we've done different things. So they kind of like, I've seen my pedigree, they've seen me talk about things and bring them to life. Oh, I want to start a podcast, I bring it to life. Oh, I want to go abroad, I bring it to life. I want to do this. And the next time you see me, it's up, right? So I want to start this thing called Podbreak, it's up, right? So like, they knew that, oh, I'm someone who kind of like stays true to my word. I'm definitely disciplined. And those are all people I've interacted with in the past, right? There's no stranger, right? So what I'll say is, kind of like my experience spoke for me, which I didn't even know I had. I didn't even know I was doing those things. Anything I do, I'll just try to put my 100%. And some things won't work out, definitely. But for the majority of things, I tend to create a good impression. Like I said, how I even started this business was an old employer reaching out to me and asking me, do you want to come back? Okay, can you come on contract? Like, if I didn't and that was for a job I stayed for like a year and a half, not even a long time. So if I didn't create like a good impression, they wouldn't want to like give me the opportunity. I was certainly not the only person to have worked there, right? Why am I the only person like they reached out to, type of thing? So try your best. Some people just try to, focus on their own goal and not give value back, and just like try to burn all the bridges and everything as they're trying to achieve their stuff. But I'll really say, like, give value, be diligent in what you're doing, and the rewards are waiting for you in the future. So in my experience, that's what it was. It's just like people who had known me in the past, and when I was ready for something, it was a little easier to talk to those people.
So just keep doing good work, and that's gonna speak for you, right? That's what you're trying to let us know. So by the time you come calling, they're like, oh, we know him, we know his signature, he's consistent, he's reliable, he gets the work done, he has a touch of excellence.
Yeah, keep doing good work, and also personal branding is important as well, right? Like, I didn't do this deliberately as well. True. But like, also like, let people know where you're up to. Like, if that's, you don't have to be broadcasting your whole life on social media, but at least have like, if it's for professional, like have your LinkedIn page that someone who has never spoken to you, like that wants to do a podcast, for instance, can go there and kind of like at least have a sense of what you've been up to the last couple of years, type of thing. So a little bit of personal branding also helps.
I like that. Thanks for that reminder. So let's talk about media. I know you are a documentary buff. As a matter of fact, in listening to your, or even just media and entertainment as well, and you have a thing for just archiving processes. I think it shows in just how you even approach your podcast and storytelling. Like for example, when you were talking about when you were talking to LD, you had talked about how you had wished there was like a form of just archiving the process of the banking industry in Africa or even Nigeria as a whole, to like a museum you could walk into and just learn how it started, and how someone like Jim Ovia started his bank and Tony Lumelo. So what would you say has inspired your love for documentaries? And now you also have a podcast, which you're going to get into in a bit. And how would you say this passion has influenced your career and personal life?
Oh man, I blame my dad for that one, the Discovery Channel. So I blame my dad for that one. So it was back in the day. And if you're a Nigerian, you probably remember this when the Zenith decoders used to be, this was pre-DSTV. So like the Zenith decoder, like multi-choice and whatever. And you could only connect it to one TV in the house, not two. One TV, you couldn't do multi-view or whatever back in the day. So, and he connected it to the TV in his room, right? So he would give us an hour of Cartoon Network every day, just 1 hour. So we'll choose whether we want to watch Johnny Bravo or Courage the Cowardly Dog or Cow and Chicken or something. But we just had 1 hour. That was it. The other hours was Discovery Channel, right? And it was in his room, right? And if you know an African parent, you can't just go into their room, right? Any house. So what he will do is that even as he's asleep, he'll leave the TV on. It'll be muted, but it'll be on. So it'll be outside his room. It'll be on Discovery Channel and try to peep through the keyhole and be watching Discovery Channel. Like, that's what we did. And it was funny because when I went to school in DC, Discovery Channel, HQ is right there in Silver Spring, Maryland, right? Kind of like 40 minutes from my school. So it was pretty interesting going and walking the halls of Discovery Channel, like, damn, that is what shaped my whole life as a kid, right? So, or Discovery Communications, I would say. But Discovery Channel is kind of like what started it for me. I've always been a very inquisitive person. Like I said, I grew up kind of like shy and reserved, which I still kind of am. So one of those things, being by myself, is kind of like just learning, right? I'm a very curious person, and I learned a lot through reading and through documentaries. So Discovery Channel kind of like opened my eyes to the world out there. David Attenborough, all these other guys, Animal Planet later in the day, and National Geographic later as well. So that just kind of like built my affinity for documentary. And there's a way a documentary is being told. There's something deliberate about a documentary wanting to pass an information compared to the passive nature of, say, a movie, right? Or like music. There might be a message in a movie or music, but it's more passive. But a documentary is more deliberate. And it's a very interesting way to learn about something very, very quickly. If you listen to a documentary about Southeast Asia for 30 minutes, you can probably learn a whole bunch and watch a bunch of Southeast Asian movies, right? So that's kind of like my foray. My dad and Discovery Channel growing up was kind of like the birth for me. And then anything I do, I just kind of like want to learn on how to do it better. And that involves research, right? So that's kind of like how the whole documentary thing is for me. So yeah.
Nice. Good to hear that part. Thank you. So not to put the whole weight on the responsibility on your own, on you all, but I'm curious to know, as just a Nigerian born immigrant here, how do you think the representation of African cultures, and that's a very thick one because it's so diverse, in media and entertainment can be improved? And just through your foray into your podcast, because you talk to people from all walks of life, what role do you see yourself in playing in marginally improving on that perception that is not so accurate about African cultures, about Africa as a whole? I hate to say African cultures because I'm not different from someone saying, oh, I'm traveling to Africa. Where are you going? In Africa?
Right. Africa is not a country, right?
It's not a country.
Yeah, man. You should probably ask my brother this question. I'm far from a professional media person. Everything I do in media, as far as a podcast and other thing, I just to satisfy my own curiosity. So I don't have an agenda to shape anything or do anything. Although having said that, of course, course, we can be shown in a better light. But the only way we can do that is to take the responsibility for our own stories, right? Like, it's just like I said with personal branding, right? If you don't put yourself out there, like, people are not going to know what you do and who you are. Like, people, I follow this comedian and people always complain that he posts too much, but that's what he does. As a comedian, he has to brand himself as a comedian. So anytime you think about comedy, like, you're the first thing that comes to his mind, right? It's the same thing for the continent, or the same thing for a country, or the same thing for a tribe. You have to take it and own it and brand it, So, and I know, like, where I'm from in Benin, for instance, we just opened up a museum, like 2 years ago, documenting, kind of like some of the, specifically like the Benin's involvement or the impact of the Benin people in like the transatlantic slave trade and things like that. So again, that's my tribe being deliberate, right? So if we're not deliberate about our own stories, like anything we're given, we're just gonna have to take it like that, right? Like, an American journalist wrote a book about the Sorosoke and SARS thing that happened, and people were complaining. Yeah. I was like, nobody wrote a book. Like, what do you think is gonna happen? Like, if you don't write a book, they say till the lion learns to speak, the story is always going to favor the hunter, right? Because it's always going to be told from the hunter's perspective. So as a lion, if you don't try to like craft your own story. So what I'm trying to say is that we have to take ownership, right? If we want to see something changed, we have to take ownership and start infusing those things into, our narrative, or else, it's going to be handed to us and we have to take it however we receive it. So that's my own 2 cents on the whole issue. It's a very broad issue, but hey, that's my own 2 cents. So.
I mean, I like that. I think, and I'm beginning to see just some proliferation of African. Let me just talk about Nigeria. Just how, like Netflix, for example, now, even though we can have some things that are not so nice to say about that, but the fact that Nigerian music has gone so far, and our artists have put us on a world map. I went on a cruise the other day, and when we stopped at, was it Haiti or somewhere, or maybe Jamaica? And they were blasting Afro music, like, non-stop. And I'm like, wait, what? Have I just, entered Nigeria back? So I agree with you. We have to be able to tell our own story. Otherwise, it will just be co-opted. And I'm hoping that even with the opportunity afforded by social media to kind of, help spread those things. Because we're seeing that on TikTok, and all these trends, especially during COVID, how the world felt like a global village, a small global village. With time, hopefully, we can begin to change that narrative. But I think we've certainly started doing it in some areas. But
definitely in our music, and I'm so proud of where the music is now. And I have this feeling that this is just the beginning, right? The music is the launch pad. But Nigerians all over, like in business, in tech, in government, everywhere, kind of like how, 8% of Silicon Valley CEOs are Indians. That's going to be Nigerians in the next 15 to 20 years. Just mark my words, right? I think the Afro beats and the music is kind of like shining light on how talented we are in other areas. So what is happening in the Afrobeat is going to happen in business, it's going to happen in tech, it's going to happen in government, it's going to happen in spirituality, different aspects of life, We're going to definitely have that window, but, hopefully we don't drop the bag when we're giving that global stage. But yeah.
I agree. Thank you for that. Now let's talk about your podcast. It's called the Culture Class Podcast. And according to you, it's a podcast that encourages people to learn from one another. And in your class, everyone is a student of life. How did it get started? And my goodness, I should just commend you on your repertoire. It's such a rich research you have on there, and the questions and the topics you've explored, the people you've brought in. It's like if someone were to like do a content analysis of what's the commonality? There's no common. The commonality is that it's just a space to learn about everybody. Right. And you've enriched it with diverse, people just living their life and doing, great things in their space. And it's not even just like the superstars like LD, but even like commoners. But the commonalities that is a space to kind of grow and learn more about, just how much more united we are than, separate when it comes to diversity as well. So what about it? What got you started in your podcast, and what has just been some greatest? What would you say are some of the highlights of just having your podcast? What has it done for you? We talk about sometimes being a host, you get to like share stories, and your listeners tell, "Oh, thank you for that episode, it really helped me." Now, I'd like to turn that around and ask you, what has it done for you having that podcast?
Man, first, to answer your first question, kind of like how it started, right? So my last year living in Nigeria, I lived in Southwest Nigeria, Ekiti State, right? I lived there for a year. So I was working in a bank, and they moved me to kind of like go set up a new branch in Ekiti State, right? And I knew nobody in Ekiti State, but like it's Nosa, so I'm like, okay, let's go type thing. So I lived there, and because I didn't know anyone, I spent a lot of time listening to podcasts, right? And this was like 2016. That's when I started to discover podcasts, and I always wanted to kind of like explore starting my own podcast. So when I moved to the US, I moved to DC, and DC is just a mesh of like global cultures. Like I met people from Romania, India, Pakistan. I made all these friends. American University is also like a very relatively diverse, not all the way diverse, but I guess how you look at it, there's some diversity there. So I made all these friends, and the School of Communication was literally there. Like I'm a type of person that will take advantage of every resource. They had a studio in the School of Communications. I was in the School of Business, right? And I happened to work at a campus job who had a SOC, School of Communication student. So I was like, look, Tongwa, let's team up and start a podcast so we can use your School of Communication badge to have access to that studio and start a podcast. That's kind of like how it started. But yeah, it's been pretty interesting and rewarding so far. My podcast is going to be 5 years old in November this year. So doing a podcast for 5 years is like, man, it's a lot. So people ask me like, what's the motivation? It's not like I'm making money or anything from it, but the rewarding thing have just been the people I've met. Right? Those conversations I've had, these are people that oftentimes we get to continue the conversation. I mean, meeting someone like you would have never been possible without the podcast. Meeting people like Nancy, like LD, Richard, like everything I've done, it's a very good networking tool. And because I started it as a student or a business student, that was a very interesting way. Like my podcast was instrumental in getting me my job. My podcast has been instrumental in business.
Wow.
My podcast has been instrumental. I would reach out to an old guest and say, oh yeah, you work here. Can you introduce me to that person? Like I brought it up. Like I remember when I was interviewing after business school, I brought it up that, I think my podcast was about 2 years old then. I was like, I've been doing this podcast for 2 years. I was just impressed, that, someone could stick to something for 2 years. And luckily for me, I wasn't talking about Kanye West and Kim Kardashian fighting. No shade to anyone who does any of that pop culture stuff. But there are a lot of people that do topics that they can't necessarily bring to the corporate environment for good reason. But me, I talk about stuff that I can take anywhere, right? So it's kind of like nerdy stuff anyway. So that networking piece and, has really opened the door for other things that I've benefited from, not directly. Again, coming back to kind of like whatever you're doing, try to do it well. So if I have a guest on the podcast, they have a good time. I make that connection and I can offer value to them. Because sometimes I also just reach out to my old guests and say, oh, when you came on the podcast, you talked about this. I saw this link. You should check this out. You should apply for this. You should add this to your business. I try to add value in those other ways behind the scenes. So when I need something like 2-3 years down the line and I reach out, they're very receptive to me as well. It's definitely not easy, but, that's something that has been rewarding for me. So.
Wow, thanks for that. I mean, especially landing a job and just being able to almost like keep connected, not just to your topics, but also to the guests, being able to know, okay, who has this that I can get from, or who can I share this with? Thanks for that reminder of just keeping it moving and maintaining that network of, keeping your network, codifying your network in such a way that you're in a loop with things that might be coming up and what you can share with others. Now, I know for a fact you have communities of practice, and it's not even a no-brainer that despite just being here for a few years, I have a strong suspicion that your network is very strong in the sense that you're very intentional about networking, because there's no way otherwise you'll have been able to do it. Great to get you far, but then to get people to buy into that dream and work with you is one thing. And this is how I know. I'm also a part of one of the legacies you have, which is Podbreak. And I will say that, I know the importance of communities of practice, right? And especially for podcasters, it's a great way to connect with like-minded people, to develop those sustainable professional relationships. And for you, you're very intentional about, let's not just reinvent the wheel. How can we bring, Africa to the fore? How can we pull our resources together? And I know you come up with really bright ideas. You were even thinking about how maybe we should just hire a tech and everybody can share, do like cost sharing. So you're really, really big on that. So your culture class is one, Podbreak is another. How did that come about? And again, similarly with the question with the culture class, what has Podbreak been like for you? And for those who might be interested in being a part of it, is this something that is open to just any podcaster who, identifies as Black? Or what are your inclusion criteria for Podbreak?
Yeah, I mean, Podbreak, just for context, is like we call it the gathering of African podcasters in the diaspora, right? So we're all podcast hosts, producers, enthusiasts, whatnot. And we're all kind of like living in the diaspora, but we're all of African descent. I think we have like 17 countries or so represented in Podbreak. How it came about was, again, me doing culture class. Just by virtue of culture class, I got to interact with people from a whole bunch of countries. I probably interacted with people from about 50 plus countries at this point. And, a lot of them were Africans, right? And there's this huge event back on the continent called Africa Podfest, which I got to participating for a year or two. And I wanted something, I kind of try to reach out to the organizers and try to kind of involve the African diaspora in some way. I wanted that. But they, for good reason, I totally, respect their decision. They wanted to kind of focus on the continent. So I you know what, I know a bunch of African podcasters. I've been on other podcasters' show. A lot of African podcasters have been on my show. Let's set up something. So I reached out to 4 or 5 people in my network. Matilda, Okuchi, a bunch of other people, and say, hey, this is an idea I have. The first idea was for a tour. That was the initial idea, right? Let's do a tour. Culture class was turning 3 years old or something back then. I was look, I really love to do a multi-city tour, go to 4 or 5 cities, like how Joe Buddy used to do. But so I was man, but a tour is so expensive for a podcast that's not making money. So man, can we come together 3, 4 of us while all African podcasters do the Africa podcast tour? And that's kind of the initial stuff. But then, pivoted a little bit. We got talking. I said, look, okay, instead of doing a multi-city tour, let's go to one city and just at least meet up, record, gel over a weekend and do all that. And we did that. We called it Podbreak 2022. And then from there, to keep the conversation going and everything, okay, let's start a WhatsApp group. We can meet once a year or once every 2 years, but let's continue this conversation virtually. And that's how, Podbreak kind of blossomed, and every podcaster referred another podcaster. So that's kind of how we arrived at where we are today. So we're certainly welcome all podcast hosts who are Africans who are living in the diaspora. Because we have people everywhere. As far as what I've benefited from it, it's pretty much community. I'm very big on community. I'm very big on networking. So again, meeting people like you, my senior colleague. Meeting meeting people and it's also helped me deepen a lot of the relationships I already had, because me and Okuchi I've gotten to be very interesting friends over the last couple of years. I've been running Podbreak. I've gotten to know Zambaza a little bit more. So, that connection, that community is very, very important, because, it might not end at Podbreak. I've done a lot of these things over time to know that, look, 5 years down the line, 10 years down the line, you never know where this will go, but you should just kind of cultivate that while you have it, and then it might lead to something,
Wow. I mean, let me just, note of correction, I'm not a senior colleague.
My distinguished colleague.
I still have a lot to learn from you. Thank you, seriously. Thank you for such a refreshing conversation. I've taken a lot from just chatting with you today. I think the biggest one is to just keep doing your work in a way like as if no one is watching. No, you're not doing the good work because you want to be compensated for it. Just keep doing have your personal branding, and eventually that will speak up for you. Your grit is gonna go a long way, but there's nothing quite like having people who believe in you. But you have to have been able to prove yourself, like shown consistently what you're able to do. And I think that's one of the things I'm taking away from your conversation today. And I even think just the sheer, I don't want to say, I don't even know the word for it, but it's quite a laudable achievement that you've had in the past 6 years, Nosa. And I don't know whether sometimes you even tap yourself like, is this all a dream? You've done great for someone who's just been here. Because I imagine that transitioning from a student to a non-student role, we actually didn't even explore the immigration pathway and all that. And so I imagine there was some, maybe just with most immigrants, a little bit of adjustments in that area as well. And then starting a business and then starting another business. But here you are, and I imagine that this is just the beginning for you. And given the kind of person you are, I can tell that there's still more coming, our way. Like we ain't seen nothing yet. But all of that to say, thank you for leaving us with, some doses of inspiration, and just a reminder that as complicated as this country can be, it's still possible to have your dreams, And I want to thank you for your candor and just your openness. I think that's the meaning of candor. Just talking about these things. Thank you.
You're welcome, Mo. I look forward to doing it again, sometime in future. So thank you as well for having me on your show as well.
Thank you. Maybe we should do like a Podbreak in-person live session. We should still do that tour. It'd be nice to tour like a major city and just gather our people.
Yeah, you know what's funny? Nice, like we did the first one in Chicago, right? In 2022.
I remember. Yeah, I wasn't there.
We've always talked about doing one at Essence Fest, right? So Sambasa, through his wife, has some plug, and they always go to Essence Fest every year. I think it's in Louisiana, if I'm not mistaken. Every year. So, going down to like Louisiana, wherever Essence Fest is, and just tying into that whole, Black excellence and Africa and everything, and doing it. And obviously there'll be Essence Fest, like that city is always like alive that whole week. So maybe we can have something like that in 2024. You never know. But we'll definitely do another in-person meeting. But we'll keep you guys posted on that one.
Looking forward to it. And on behalf of everyone on the show, thank you so much for coming. For those who want to find you, where can they find you?
Oh, it depends. Find me for what? I should probably get a personal website.
Yeah. I see what you do.
Yeah, but let me just drop the major links. So for work, so I am a CDFI consultant, and I work with community development financial institutions, credit unions, community banks. We do a little bit of outsourced underwriting, technical assistance support, that type of stuff. You can look up Overwrite. So the name of my company is Overwrite, which is kind of like underwrite, but overwrite. Overwriteinc.com. That's for business. For the podcast is cultureclasspodcast.com. Check that out as well. And then for Podbreak, if you're an African podcaster interested, is podbreak.org. Podbreak.org. So, yeah.
I'll put all of that in the show notes. Quickly before you go, what are some business ideas that we can explore in the year 2020? Any chat GPT stocks we can start, buying, or what does the future look like as far as investment? Where should we start focusing on our portfolio?
Look, I think everyone just needs to be self-aware, right? Again, like I'm not that person who say, hell, everyone needs to be a businessman, get 10 houses by 22, and all these YouTube motivational speakers. Be very self-aware. What do you like to do, right? Build a business around your passion. Well, not your passion. Build a business around your skills and what you're good at, right? So if you're a podcaster, for instance, you like to document things, you like to edit, you can start like a podcast agency that helps people edit their other podcasts, or like book guests or whatnot, things like that. If you love to, I'm more so also like recently I've been tilting more towards small business compared to tech businesses. To be honest, because I feel like to an extent, like the tech businesses have changed the world. Don't get me wrong, but I feel like, man, they're small businesses aren't given a lot of credit in the grand scheme of things. But if you're thinking around businesses, there are several tools that can help you make a successful business in this day and time. But I'll just say focus on where your interests are and where your skills are, right? Regardless of what that is, dancing, singing, whatever, you can build a business out of it. So I won't tell you go and do one business because I wouldn't want you to do something that's outside your wheelhouse. So that's a very introspective question. Ask yourself, what are you good at? And then based on the tools that are there today for content creation and things like that, give it ChatGPT, things like that. So it's very important to infuse those tools into whatever business you think you're going to run to amplify that business. But as far as the core idea, it has to be something native to you. So you just have to be self-aware of that, in my opinion.
What a very conservative response.
I'm not out here selling courses and being a guru, so I don't know, man. I'm just doing my thing. So.
Thank you so much, Nosa. It was a pleasure having you on the show, and again, hope to bring you back again for more stuff.
Definitely look forward to it more.
All right, everyone. That was a podcast with Nosa. Don't forget to catch up on other episodes from the podcast and follow him on Instagram on the handles. We'll link them on the show notes. And if you have any questions or comments, drop them as well. Catch you guys on another episode of the More Sibyl Podcast. I remain your host, Mo. Bye. Thank you so much.
Are we done? Thank you. Okay.
Yes, we're done. I'm going to end it.